This episode is brought to you by our friends at PeopleBench and Paperly. PeopleBench specialise in helping schools build their collective workforce and retain their staff. We all know the future of work is fast, flexible and connected, and we also know the crunch for talented teachers is on our doorstep. PeopleBench are here to help you manage and plan your workforce with an intuitive platform that can provide all the data you need to make evidence-informed decisions about your next staff and workforce strategy. Head to peoplebench.com to learn more. Paperly is also back, and they're proud to support the Ed Leaders podcast. Paperly fills the gap in your traditional SIS or LMS and is designed to help your school create paperless, time-efficient systems. Check them out at paperly.education. Now let's get to today's show. Hi, welcome to Ed Leaders, the podcast covering all the interesting ideas about leadership, strategy, culture, and the business of K-12 education, where we believe with better leaders, we will make better schools. I'm your host, Luke Callier, and joining me each week in the chair is my co-host and colleague, Matthew Irving. Before we get started, Matt, I'm going to ask you, we have a newsletter, and what should someone expect if they sign up?
I'm so pleased you asked, Luke. You ask me every time, and I don't always have the best answers, but I was thinking about this about a minute ago, and I was thinking, well, it's one of those newsletters of value, provides really interesting insights, and sparks curiosity. But one of the things I find interesting is it always makes you click on something next. Because it's that curiosity piece, you always want to go a little bit step further, and there's some really good links in there. So that's why I would connect with the newsletter. Luke.
All right, well played, Matt. I'm going to give you an 8.8 out of 10 today. And for the audience out there, we are recording on the 31st of May, and there is an edition coming out today. So look out for that. You can sign up to the newsletter at edleaders.com.au. Now, on to today's guest, Dr. Adrian Camm. Adrian is the principal at Westbourne Grammar School in Melbourne, a position he's held since 2022. Before that, he was also the associate principal at Westbourne for a year. He was also the deputy under former guest, Mal Cater at Westbourne Grammar. Have I got that right? Yes. And so without further ado, let's get to it. Adrian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Luke. And thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
Now, we love to start the show with a bit about your professional journey in education. How did you get here? Where did you start? What are you doing?
Yes, thanks, Luke. 17th year in education. Started my career as a permission to teach teacher in a very low socioeconomic rural school. Spent a few years there. It was really formative. And then pretty much from year 2 or year 3 in my career, had leadership positions. I was director of faculty. I sort of moved into the Department of Education for a little bit and had some interesting experiences there in a curriculum innovation role, which was really interesting. Moved through to independent schools as Director of Teaching and Learning and Director of the Centre for Learning, Research and Innovation at Geelong College. Went and worked for Mal Cater there for a couple of years at Mentone, and then here I am at Westbourne. So I love education. I love education in all its forms. I didn't actually set out to make a career in education. I actually did an undergraduate degree specialising in computing and mathematics, and specifically in an area called cryptography. But due to some life circumstances, I actually wasn't able to move away from home upon finishing that degree. And so I basically sat down and thought, well, what am I going to do? I might do a graduate diploma in education for a year and see where that takes me. And then halfway through that year, I actually got a phone call from a principal in a rural area and said, we're looking for a physics teacher. Can you help us? And I said, well, I'm not actually qualified yet. He said, don't worry about that. When can you start? And I started the next week. And so I was actually teaching full-time and finishing my graduate diploma concurrently. But 6 months into the job, I loved it, loved working with children. And I think education, teaching, leadership, being a principal, it's one of the best jobs in the world.
And Adrian, on that journey, was there a formative experience that propelled you forward towards the principalship?
I think I was very fortunate, Matt, to have a really softly spoken mentor in my first 2 years of teaching. And we actually sat next to each other in our particular staff areas. And he was so supportive, but so encouraging, and also believed in me wholeheartedly. And I think that was really formative for me, because it gave me the confidence then to try new things, to do things that perhaps I wasn't ready to do or had no experience in doing yet. And just to sort of learn by doing. And I think I've actually taken that with me throughout my career. And I think as principal, Matt, I'm sure you'll agree, every day there's something new. Every day there's something that you haven't done before, a situation that you haven't encountered, a decision that you have to make that you haven't made before. And so I think that ability to be confident in just being flexible, adaptable, and being okay with not knowing is really, really important. So that's actually served me well. And I actually credit that to that mentor that I had in my first year or two of teaching.
Now, for the audience out there that don't know too much about Westbourne Grammar, I see a little bit of, what Westbourne's doing online on LinkedIn. But if you could describe Westbourne Grammar, paint the picture for the audience out there about your school.
Westbourne Grammar is 158 years old. It's a co-educational school, non-denominational. It's got no affiliation with the church. It's got 2 campuses currently, one in Williamstown, which is close to the Melbourne CBD, and it's got our main campus located in a suburb west of Melbourne called Truganina. We're located in the 3rd fastest growing area in Australia, just behind Brisbane and the Gold Coast. And so our enrolments this year, we're at 2,060 students. Next year, we'll probably grow that by about 140. And then the next year, we'll reach our capacity with the introduction of a new middle school building, which has been specifically designed to cater for the increase in demand and the growth that we're experiencing as a school. And it'll cap out at about 2,350. But excitingly, the board has just agreed to a proposal to build a brand new ELC to Year 12 campus on a greenfield site further west of Melbourne. So it's an exciting school. It's full of history and tradition, but it's quite innovative as well, and it's a great place to be.
Just sounds super exciting. A greenfields site. What is the long-term strategy of that? How does that, development look over a 5 or 10 year horizon? And how does that sit alongside your existing campus? Are you intending on doubling the size of your school completely? Any further insight into that?
Yeah, it's really exciting work. And particularly from my perspective, and talking with my colleagues, it's not too often that you get an opportunity to do, a huge project like this. But I was very fortunate to come into a school where the board had purchased some land back in 2009 as an investment. But it actually was a really prudent investment because the location of the land is now in the largest master plan community that's currently planned in Victoria. It's going to be home to 42,000 new homes, 110,000 new residents. And so our plan is to build a brand new ELC to Year 12 campus that'll cater for an additional 1,500 students. So we've done all the business planning, the financial modelling, the demographic analysis and study, and it's absolutely a foregone conclusion that it's going to succeed just due to the growing demand in independent education, yes, the need for more schools in this particular area of Victoria, but given the explosion in population in that particular area, they're going to need about 22 new schools just in that area alone over time. So it's really exciting. It's still early days, like in terms of timelines. We've got the plans in place. We've put forward the business case. We've done all the studies. The board has approved. Now it's a lot of work with town planning and the city council in relation to the staging, because the area is the first precinct of the area has just been gazetted. And so the infrastructure will start going in over the next 12 to 18 months. And so we want first mover advantage. We want to be in there as the infrastructure goes in. But that work is still ongoing with the City Council. So realistically, stage 1 of that new campus is probably a 5-year timeline.
And Adrian, one of the things that I find really interesting about the play and, sort of experiencing at the moment is the study, the social demographic work that needs to be done that underpins your business case and the like. Wondering if you could go a little bit deeper and just describe to us a little bit about what kind of research you're looking at, and what are the things that you're looking for as you build out a business case?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Matt. I think there's a lot of different elements to that. I think for me, it was taking the board along on the journey, because when the board purchased the land in 2009, it was actually documented at the time that, yes, it was an investment, but what it would also provide is opportunities for the school in the future, if it decided to do so, to build a third campus. And conversations had really stalled at a board level. And when I arrived, it was still being talked about as, what do we do with this land? Do we keep it? It'll continue to appreciate in value. Do we sell it? Do we sell half of it, keep half of it? Do we build a school? What type of school? Is it primary? Is it secondary? Is it P to 12? And there was no real momentum around those conversations. And so part of the work for me was to really grab that work and do what was required to put everything in front of the board to make a decision. And that, now, I would have been happy if that decision was, we are not going to build a third campus. I actually thought that we should. But if that was the decision of the board, at least that was a decision. And then as principal, as an executive team, we could refocus our work and make sure that we were focusing on the here and now, rather than focusing on what the next 5 to 10 years might look like. But thankfully, we presented the case to the board, and they made the decision that, yes, okay, we're going to build it. So what did that look like? It was taking the board on the journey. So one of the first things I did was actually go back through the archives back to 2009 and actually pull out every single minuted conversation that the board had engaged in since 2009 to say, hey, this has been an ongoing conversation for a long time, and here's the chronology of board conversations since 2009. That was a really important piece of work. Then it was putting together the feasibility study. So the feasibility study looked at things like, I guess just very briefly, it was things like, what are our objectives? What's the current situation analysis? What's the Australian school education landscape look like at the moment in terms of the different sectors? It looked at a competitor analysis summary in the surrounding areas to see if the location would actually be viable for the entrance of a new independent school. It looked at some financial modelling. It looked at demographic analysis. It looked at infrastructure timelines. And then, of course, like things like risks, mitigations, and as a school leadership team, an executive team, our internal readiness, but also our operational capacity to continue to deliver an outstanding educational experience in the here and now for our families, but also be investing a lot of time in planning for a new campus. And so presented that all into a format and then put a business plan on a page. So the actual feasibility study was about 200 and something pages, but then actually summarising that, if you like, into an executive summary with an action. Here's what my recommendation is. Let's make a decision on that today. And so that's where we got to. After some really robust conversations at a board level, the decision was made, and it was unanimous. And it's incredibly exciting in the life and history of our school.
Just to follow that up, because I'm super interested in it, because I know Matt probably is as well, because he and I have both done a bit of work in kind of like that environmental business scanning, proposals, demographic work. Is that a piece of work that you knew what you wanted it to look like at the outset? And did you or your team do that internally, or did you outsource aspects of that to ensure that you were getting the comprehensive nature of that report and I guess independent validity on numbers and whatnot? Or was the board happy for you to do that work yourself?
The board was happy for me to do that work myself, but I guess what we did do is we had our marketing team obviously present it in a really accessible format. We did engage some external expertise for different aspects of the feasibility study. One piece of that work was some very specific demographic analysis for that particular area. And obviously, because it's a new master planned area, it's a guess. It's a
Proposed.
forecast. It's the demographer's best estimate. But then using all the statistics that we had available, work that Geelong City Council had put out in terms of their social infrastructure projections, and really just collating lots of different sources of information and packaging it up into something that was digestible but rigorous and presented an argument for the development of a new campus. So we did a lot of it ourselves, and it was fascinating work. And for me in particular, I loved it. It wasn't something that I'd done before, but really drilling into the statistics and the financial models and the different scenarios and looking at alternative models, trying to get the inside information from the schools in the local area to see what their plans might be for the future, to see if they've got plans for growth, are they at capacity, and all those sorts of questions. It was a really interesting piece of work.
Don't know anyone else who loves it, Matt. Do you?
Don't know what you're talking about. No, look, absolutely love it. Adrian, one of the things we've been talking about with some of my colleagues over the last week is that notion of needing people operationally that work in the business, so deputies, associate principals and the like, so that the principal can work on the business, and you've just been describing that notion of on the business, that future piece, sitting outside while people are taking care of the day-to-day. What does that construct look like for you at Westbourne?
Yeah, it's incredibly important to have both of those things in a school, Matt, those who work on the business and those who work in the business. And I think oftentimes when you have a turnover of staff, oftentimes particularly in senior leadership roles, sometimes the transition can be difficult for new people coming into a school because people have a certain expectation of what they expect from that person in their leadership role. And sometimes a leader is great at working in the business. They're on the microphones at the swimming carnivals. They're walking around picking up the rubbish in the yard. But then other times, if you're not that person and you're coming into a school for the first time, well, then people will be starting to say, well, hang on a minute, this is a bit different to what I was expecting. What are they actually doing? So it's about also educating staff and educating our community about what contemporary leadership means in a thriving and growing environment like ours. So I think what does that look like for us? It basically looks like we continue to educate our community around people's roles and their responsibilities in our school. For me, it's about making our executive team the highest functioning and the highest performing team in the school and really leading into distributed leadership. Because schools move pretty quickly, the world moves pretty quickly, and we've got really ambitious plans for what we're doing here at the school. So unless we have a distributed approach, we can't actually achieve our goals. And so structurally, when I started, I was very fortunate to make a great appointment in Tegan Collins as a deputy principal. And then within 12 months, because of our growth and because of how great she was, we appointed her as associate principal. And I look at that as, associate principal is a title that's probably not that common in Australian independent schools, but I see it more of a partnership. So I can delegate full operational authority to the associate principal and have implicit trust in their ability to manage the day-to-day if my focus at the time is off doing strategic planning for the years ahead. And our executive team continues to grow, and the work that we do as a team continues to build people's confidence, to allow them to build their capacity, to really step into their roles and to own their respective areas of the school. Of course, keeping communication lines open fully because we need to continually communicate, but trusting them to own their space 110%. And
you've talked there about being the most high-performing team in the school, and I think there's a lot of there's just huge merit in if you can demonstrate what a high-performing team looks like to the other teams within the school. And I think, I think in some schools they get that right, and in some schools they're probably, still working towards that. I'm wondering, when you came into the school, or especially into the principal role, was it a high-performing team was it the most high performing team in the school at that time? And what have you specifically done to work towards making it the most high performing team, if it wasn't already?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when I started as principal, there was some dissatisfaction, I would say, with the way perhaps the executive was operating from the perspective of some of our staff. And it was incumbent upon me very early on to set the expectation about how we need to position ourselves, how we need to be perceived, and what are the non-negotiables. And in my first year, there was several retirements from the executive team, and unfortunately, there was a number of executive members that I had to also engage in some performance management. And as a result of that, they actually moved on as well. So when we talk about, that cliche of building the plane whilst it's flying, in my first year as principal, it was absolutely the case in terms of almost building a brand new executive team from scratch, which had its challenges, but it had so many advantages as well. And so we were able to really target the people that we wanted at the school. And so we did have a targeted recruitment strategy. And one of the things that we talk about at Westbourne is that we want people at the school who are humble, hungry, and smart. And what we mean by that is, humble's self-explanatory, but by hungry, we want them to be ambitious. We want them to be on the up, and we want them to come in and do some great work. And they might only be here for, 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 years at the most. And then they'll move on into a promotional position elsewhere. And that's okay. And in fact, that's what we want. And that's what I want, because I see that as making a systems-wide contribution, but also making sure that people have career trajectories and individual development plans in place so that they can be the best that they can be whilst they're here, but then they go off and do some amazing work elsewhere. So we went out, we advertised for some roles, we intentionally recruited for others, and we built a fantastic team very quickly. I guess the average age of the executive team is probably a little bit lower than most executive teams, I would imagine, in independent schools. That wasn't a deliberate thing that we went out to achieve, but it was actually something that just came about through our target on getting people who are humble, hungry, and smart. And then what we did then was we were very intentional. So the executive meets once a fortnight, and about half of every meeting was dedicated towards leadership development. And that included things like building trust amongst each other, talking about how important it is to engage in constructive conflict to get the best possible outcome for the school. And what does that look like in practice? How do we engage in constructive conflict and dialogue to get that best possible outcome? Then as a result, how do we commit as a team to decisions and ideas and actions, even if we don't necessarily agree with them? And so that's that concept of you have to weigh into the debate. And if you're heard, you've put your opinion on the table, even if it isn't the opinion or the decision that gets actioned, then at least you've been heard. And so then you combine. And then it's accountability. How do we keep accountability to each other? And how do we call people to account? And if people aren't accountable to the team, and they aren't accountable to each other, and they aren't accountable to their individual portfolios, well, they're probably got inattention to results, and not individual results, but the results of the collective. And so we focused relentlessly on that. We do book clubs. We did personality profiling. We wrote one-page user manuals, which give fellow executives an insight into us as individuals, what we like, what we dislike, what gives us energy, how we think, how we like to work. And that short circuits a process that normally takes years to develop that trust. And through trial and error, people then learn about how people like to work, their preferences, and so on. But by engaging intentionally and deliberately in this sort of work, we were able to develop that understanding of each other, of us as a collective, really, really quickly. And then we moved on to things like everyone needed to complete the AICD company directors course, because every individual on that executive needs to understand how schools work, irrespective of their portfolio. And they also need to understand how governance works and the difference between operations. We had everyone do individual career pathway plans, professional learning plans, and then we looked at targeted visibility strategies. And so targeted visibility strategies for us as a collective, but also individually. And what we mean by that is how are we going to be visible? What does visibility mean? Who are we going to be visible to? For what purpose? When? How? And who are the different stakeholders for visibility? So it's obviously the students, the staff, the parents. But then when we talk about career trajectories, we also talk about, individual brand identities and making sure that we're positioning ourselves as experts at what we do by engaging in social media, by writing thought leadership articles, by talking to the media, by presenting at conferences, and really putting ourselves out there so that we're visibility to every single stakeholder that we've identified, almost that 360 visibility, if you like. And so as a result, in a 2-year time span, I think now the executive is one of the most high-functioning teams in the school. And as a result, that has then spun off to different aspects of the school. And so we run a Learning to Lead leadership development program here at the school, which is open to every single staff member at the school, irrespective of whether they're a graduate teacher, a ground staff member, or a finance officer. And that's a 6-month bespoke program now that has developed a common language of leadership across the school. And we've had 150 staff members through 2 cohorts. And so they're learning things like, how do I develop a personal leadership philosophy? How do I engage in difficult conversations? How do I lead a high-performing team? What's the difference between leadership and management? What does project management mean as a leader? And how do I oversee the end-to-end delivery of a particular project? How do I persuade? How do I speak publicly? What does executive presence mean? And how do I get it? And all these sorts of things. And as a result, we've created this environment where everyone's involved in the advancement of the school. And it's beautiful.
Adrian, I just want to sort of step back. You talked about that notion of short-circuiting, that piece towards high performance and really getting that high-function team happening. And you sort of referenced some performance management early on, and quite critical in doing some of that work early on. People might self-select out, or people will be taking on a journey. Just want you to sort of talk to us about, I guess, that the importance of performance management, how you went about it, and perhaps some of those outcomes that helped you short circuit towards a high functioning team.
It's not a fun part of the job. It's something I really struggled with early, and it's something I still don't like to do, because we're talking about people and we're talking about people's lives. And if one of those outcomes is that due to performance or due to behavioural issues that a person then is no longer at the school, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, that's incredibly difficult for everyone involved. I think, but the way I've been able to rationalise that as a leader is that we are really custodians or stewards of schools, and particularly those schools that have had an incredibly long history, like Westbourne's 158 years. So you really have to take yourself out of the equation. It's not about me. You need to check your ego at the door. You need to try and take your emotion out of it as much as possible. You need to treat people with kindness, and you give them every opportunity to try and improve. So before we even get to performance management, it's coaching conversations, it's feedback, it's support. What support mechanisms can we put in place to help you to get to where you need to be? And then only as a last resort will then you start engaging in perhaps what is a formal performance management process. But it has to happen, because if people aren't performing at the required level, well, then the school is suffering. And if the school is suffering, that has flow-on effects. It negatively affects culture. It could affect financial performance. It could affect student satisfaction, parent satisfaction. There are so many flow-on effects that if you don't do it, I think it's worse. And so, I think you always approach it in a humane way. I always like to do any sort of formal performance management personally, because I think that needs to happen rather than outsourcing it to, a HR officer or people and culture person. And at the end of the day, sometimes you need to make the tough call, and that's what it is. It is what it is. Now those people who you're performance managing, you're never going to end up on their Christmas card list, I don't think. But if you do it in the right way and you put everything that you have in place to support them, well, then oftentimes they will have the realization, whether it's in the moment or whether it's later, that actually it was probably a good thing that they moved on for a whole range of reasons. So, I think it's a win-win in the end.
I have seen Matt do a few of those conversations over time, Adrian, and I think it's probably about 50-50, Matt, in terms of if you're still on the Christmas card list or not.
Well, as Adrian said, it's all about how you do it. And, some people through that self-selection actually realise that it's not the right place for them, and that we sort of shape what is the right thing for them. And so I think that when Adrian was talking about that support piece, just how critical that is in what those next steps for that person.
And that's 100%, Matt. I think in our context here with the senior executives that I was talking about, it wasn't just there's the door, thanks for everything, see you later. It was an ongoing support piece as well. Okay, so this is not the right place for you, but let's put in some outplacement support. Let's put in some support for you and your family. Let's put in some emotional support if it's required. And having touch points after the person has exited the school to make sure that they're travelling okay, that they're going to get back on their feet, that they land a new job somewhere else. That's just as important as anything else.
I think ultimately you want to see people thrive, and it's taking them on that journey to ensuring that they put themselves in a position where they can thrive. That's the important part. I kind of want to go back to, you made a comment about a 360-degree view of visibility. I haven't really heard any principal or leader talk about that 360-degree view of visibility for multiple stakeholders. And, from what I've seen, I think, you and your executive team tend to do that quite well, especially to other people in schools. But I'm wondering what impact you've seen through the mechanism of recruitment, and whether that's had an impact on recruitment for you personally as finding executive team or finding staff that are buying into the culture of Westbourne or the culture of Camm, and what that means more broadly for the school.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the simple answer is we're seeing lots of positive impacts in that space, not just from a recruitment piece, but funnily enough, from an enrolment piece as well. So just last week, I had two dads reach out to me on messaging on LinkedIn and wanting to enrol their students because they were relocating from Sydney to Melbourne. And so we actually got 2 enrolments from a LinkedIn message, funnily enough. But no, I think the way that we approach things like LinkedIn, for instance, as one social media platform and as part of our visibility strategy is also about democratizing great leadership and management and teaching and learning practice in our school. And I think if the more we can share and the more we can publicly acknowledge and celebrate not just the work happening here, but the people doing the work, it builds a real culture of being seen and being valued. And so there's a lot of intangible outcomes that come from that. But absolutely, we've probably recruited 3 staff in the last 12 months just from the work that we put out on LinkedIn and what they see us in terms of the team building and how we're commenting on each other's posts and celebrating the work and acknowledging others. They've come in and they've said, listen, we've seen what's been happening there and we want to be part of it. And I actually think that's awesome. And so we'll continue to leverage that and harness that because unashamedly, you know, we're in the business of self-promotion. We have to be from a marketing perspective, I think. And if we're not telling our story, who it is and what is that story? And so it's as much about controlling our narrative in those online spaces as anything else.
As a leader of a school, you're probably aware that on average, around 80% of the cost of running a school is the salaries and on-costs of its workforce. And yet most schools do not have a comprehensive visibility of their workforce data and metrics. That's where People Bench excel through their patented and school workforce benchmarking and strategy development platform. They use data science, machine learning, and predictive analytics to provide insights and resources that support school leaders to become self-sufficient in responding to the future of work in schools. The platform can benchmark your workforce data to other like schools, build your workforce strategy, and monitor progress on metrics like teacher resilience and workforce culture, while keeping an eye on how these factors impact student outcomes. A People Bench subscription provides your school or system with access to their school workforce research, school workforce benchmarking tools, dashboards and reports, workforce resilience tracker, their workforce culture tracker, their workforce strategy tracker, and much, much more. Check them out at peoplebench.com. I've got a question for you. How many paper processes does your school have? Well, that's where Paperly comes in. Paperly is an integrated one-stop shop of intelligent workflows that can help your staff save time and reduce that administrative burden that we know exists in schools and we all face on a daily basis. They're a completely modular admin management solution, meaning you just choose whichever of the 16 super useful modules that your school needs. My personal favourite that we use is their calendar module, which makes the administration of the school calendar so much easier. Check out paperly.education today and chat with the team about a demo for your school. Now back to today's show.
Adrian, what's interesting to me about that is that there are some principals that run away from social media. They run away because they're concerned about that notion of self-promotion, ego, and looks like you're sort of, shouting from the rooftops. How do we get that nuance right where it is about the story, the narrative we want to tell without flipping into that, hey, look at me?
It's really tricky because people will interpret it in different ways, won't they, Matt? I personally, I know somewhat, a couple of people have said to me, how do you get the time? And it's like, well, realistically, I probably only spend maybe 15 minutes a day on social media, if that, and it could be when I get home from work at night, I'm just scrolling there on the couch and just liking all the different things that all the staff have been sharing at school. But I think it's something you have to be really deliberate about. I try and do 50-50, where it might be, I might share something that I'm doing, it might be a conference I'm speaking at, or an alumni reunion I'm hosting, or a book that I've read, or something like that. But then the other 50 is absolutely about celebrating something that's happening at the school, a new promotional video, someone who's just been acknowledged in a particular way, the Year 2 teacher who's doing amazing work with their students in inquiry. So I think it's a delicate balance. And I don't think you'll ever keep everyone happy because people will interpret it and perceive it in different ways. But I'm comfortable with that. I'm okay with that. And I think the way that we're doing it is great. There's a staff member at our school who, him and I have conversations about this exact topic all the time. Because when you talk about visibility and individual visibility strategies in these spaces, you're also really talking about building your brand as an educator or building your brand as a leader. Like, people are seeing what you value, what you're reading, what you're commenting on, your values, what you believe in, how you act in an online space. And so it's a really delicate balance to making sure that the way you're perceived is the way that you want to be perceived, but acknowledging that not everyone's going to perceive you that way anyway, and you can't do much about that.
Well, I think the key thing about that is that it draws people, the right people, or the people that you want to be perceived in a certain way, and like back into your community, whether that's parents or whether that's, potential staff members. If they're buying into that, then that's the type of people you want anyway. And the people who are not buying into that are by default not the people that you want in your community.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's incumbent upon us as school leaders to have visibility in these spaces and to tell our stories, to market the school, to promote, celebrate, and to educate. And I think that's the piece that people often don't see. A lot of the work in this space is also about education. We're writing articles or we're creating videos where we're addressing contemporary topics. Perhaps we're re-educating parents around misconceptions, or we're trying to put something across in terms of change management, and so we're needing to make sure that we're doing that in the right way, and that etc. So I think it's really important.
Adrian, we've been talking, I guess, there about brand and narrative, and it's the good stuff. But in the day-to-day life of a principal, there's some not so good stuff. And wondering if you might share, a story or two around some of the challenges and complexities you've faced in the role and some of the outcomes.
You're 100% right, Matt. I don't know where I heard it. I think I heard it from Dr. Paul Hicks, who's the headmaster at Camberwell Grammar here in Melbourne. And he said something like, being a principal's the best job in the world with some of the worst days. And for me, I really resonated with that. And I'd probably draw an analogy to Khalil Gibran, his famous poet. He has one of the one of my favorite quotes is, he says something like that: the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And I don't mean to say that the role of a principal is all about sorrow, but gee, you have some tough days. And you walk away some days thinking, my goodness, you've had 5 email complaints, you've had difficult conversations, you've had something happen to a student, perhaps there's a historical issue, there might be cybersecurity incident, there might be, and that's someone's complaining about the brand of sausage rolls in the canteen, and then all of a sudden you've got to the end of the day and you're just absolutely you're spent, you're absolutely smashed, and you're just dealing with this negativity just flowing over you. But I think that makes it all worthwhile as well, because then when you see the great stuff happening, when you see the students, when you see the amazing learning, the teaching, the people being celebrated for what they're doing, the happy people, the happy parents, the positive feedback, the handwritten note that you get, the significant difference you made in someone's life because of the empathy that you approached a situation with, and the support that you gave a family who might be going through a difficult time. I think it makes it all worth it. But I think as a leader, like when I reflect on where I am today, I think some of my most formative experiences have been those situations where you walk away with a scar. I won't say a battle scar because I don't like the analogy, but you walk away with something that's really deeply impacted you and left a mark on you, perhaps in a negative sense. You didn't handle a situation well. You made a mistake. You wish you had done something differently. You didn't plan thoroughly enough to mitigate something that happened when you probably should have. I think all those situations are really formative in shaping a resilience or a fortitude. And so I think if I think about some of the real negative ones, I won't share any details, but they are the ones that really hurt. They sting and they leave a scar. But I think that only makes you stronger and better and more informed as a leader. But I think it sort of probably circles back too, Matt, to what I was saying at the start. Like, you have to have a disposition of learning by doing. And, there are so many situations that come across a principal's desk. And if you don't have that disposition or mindset, I think the job could be incredibly difficult.
I'm sure Matt has experienced none of those things all wrapped up into one day at times this year, Matt.
It's a walk in the park. What are you talking about?
For the audience out there, Matt is, laughing in the background. I'm interested, like you've talked there about some of the challenges and the ongoing, difficulties that you face on the bad days. It's the best job in the world, but there are the bad days that come with that. And it's hard to, I think, shed light on how bad some of those days really can be as a principal until you're in the shoes and the fingers are all pointed at you. But I'm interested in the flip side of that in terms of your inspiration. And you talked a little bit earlier about how you share some of the work that you're doing personally. And I'm interested in, obviously the journey you've gone on to take your leadership team on that journey. But what are the things that you're personally doing to continue your growth journey in terms of either, books or people that you follow, or, where does that inspiration come from you, and how does that impact what you're going to do next as a leader with your team and your community?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I think I read extensively. I probably read a book a week. And if it's not a physical book, it's definitely an audio book, because I do have a bit of a commute to and from work each day. But I'm constantly reading about leadership and management and sociology and technology and, psychology and all sorts of different genres. And I definitely get a lot of inspiration from the things that I read and listen to. I network, but I think I'm actually quite deliberate in the way that I network, because I try to manage my time as effectively as I can. So unfortunately, I don't get to as many meetings for things like Independent Schools Victoria or AHESA or those sorts of meetings where perhaps a lot of principals and headmasters would get together in the one location at the one time, because perhaps selfishly, I don't see a lot of value for me at this point in my career in being out of the school and attending those things when I've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old at home. And so what I do is I try and be intentional with my networking. So I identify people that I want to go and talk to or learn from, and I actually go and do that off my own accord, because I feel as though I'm getting more out of that and it's more efficient for me at this point in my career. So hopefully that doesn't come across in a negative way, but the way that I rationalize that is I'm very deliberate and I'm looking for people to learn from and to grow. And so I go out and identify them. And that's the way I learn best, because then I can be very deliberate around, okay, well, I want to learn X, Y, and Z from this person. So yes, I have to build a relationship with them first, but then, tell me about X, Y, and Z and talk to me about it. And how did you do it? And how did you get there? And what were the challenges? And what would you do different next time? And then hopefully, I can offer something in return so that it's a mutually beneficial process. But I think I've just finished my PhD, which has been great. And I'm actually off on study leave next week to spend 21 days in a residential program at the Say Business School at Oxford University to look at advanced leadership and management. And I'm looking forward to really delving into that work with a real diverse group of participants from around the world. And I think for me, I don't think I've ever dedicated 21 days intensively to anything ever in my life. And so it's going to be exciting, but also a little bit daunting at the same time. But it's going to be a great challenge, and I'm sure I'll be stretched and come away from it hopefully with some new learnings and some new inspiration.
And just a quick follow-up, those people that you seek out, are they in education or are they slightly adjacent to education?
Bit of both. I'm very fortunate in my first year of principalship to have some great connections with existing principals, highly experienced principals. Mel Cater from Mentone continues to be someone I can contact if needed. Philip Grutzner from Melbourne Grammar was a mentor of mine in my first year of being a principal and continues to be on call if I require. So there are some people that are on call if I've got a particular issue or something that I need just to sound out or talk through. But then others are, very much cold call. I might see someone on LinkedIn or something that I haven't met yet, and I might send them a message and say, hey, I'd love to visit. I'd love to connect. Can I buy you a coffee? There's no urgency around it or working with your schedule, but just let me know if we can make it happen.
Adrian, I can't help think that as you read, as you build that network around you, you're off to Oxford for some study leave, that this is all culminating in a way of you thinking about education perhaps differently, and thinking about Westbourne, where it is you're about to build potentially in a greenfield site. What's your current thinking about the trajectory of schooling, and some of those sort of systems changes that we often talk about?
Yeah, there's a lot of inertia in systems change, and I think it's quite elastic. Systems are very hard to change. But I think what you can do is you can change the system from within by acknowledging that each school is individual, its context is individual, and really leaning into that and embracing it. So I just give one small example. Even though we have no affiliation with the church, for around 30 to 40 years, we have had until recent times a Christian chapel and a chapel. But with the changing demographic of our community, we have over 50 different nationalities and 20 different religious backgrounds now. Now, 30 years ago, that wasn't the case, but we are very multicultural now. And so we were listening to our community, and we made a deliberate decision to review the place of chapel and chaplaincy in the life of our school. And so we surveyed our community, we ran focus groups, we talked to people, and the overwhelming consensus was that there should, our community didn't want to focus on a singular religion. It didn't make sense. And so as a result, we've actually going through a process now of moving away from the teaching of Christianity, moving away from a model of chaplaincy in its relation to well-being, and actually decommissioning the chapel and turning it into the centre for philosophical thought. And instead of religion, we'll now embrace philosophy across the school, which will hopefully equip our young people with the skills, the tools, the attitudes, the attributes, the dispositions to be able to see things from different perspectives and to be able to engage in informed and constructive debate with their peers around topical issues of the modern day. And for example, they might be things like, this particular philosopher thinks religion is a source of good. This particular philosopher said that religion was the source of all evil. Turn and talk. Or, what additional challenges do women face in different religions? And so really creating a Socratic forum for students to still engage in understanding difference, understanding different religions, but also looking at different perspectives and different ideas and how do they work together and creating an environment where they can actually really understand people from the inside out. And so I think for me, like to answer your question, Matt, I think the future of schools has to be responsive to the individual community context and needs. Now that might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I think that's the way you go about bringing systems change. If everyone from within the system is bringing about the changes that are necessary in their own communities, well, I think that shifts the dialogue. I think it moves things in a particular direction. And then I think it actually elevates the profession in many ways by shifting that schools are failing narrative, that top-down imposition from from politicians or the government around, we're going to fix education, teachers are to blame, teacher educators are to blame because they don't educate the teachers properly, results are on the decline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the stuff that's in the media constantly. Well, if we can shift that narrative by really focusing on our own unique individual contexts, positioning ourselves in that public space, being visible, being vocal, and talking about the positive things that are happening in our own schools, well, I think that goes a long way to shifting the system.
Yeah, I kind of think I was just waiting to see if Matt wanted to ask a question, but I kind of think what's interesting to me about what you've just described there is that I think what you're saying there is it's about the community that you're in as a school. And so how do you mold what you're delivering for your customers and your community to match what their needs are? And so one thing I'm interested in then is, and I haven't really had many conversations about this with different leaders, is around when you go to a new greenfield site that's going to have a very different community, then potentially the culture and the style of education that you're going to need to deliver will be contextually different because of the fact that you're going to be in a different community. And I think many boards or leaders of schools are somewhat concerned about, we have this culture, we have this price point, we have this kind of community, and this is the type of education we deliver. And now we're going to go and play in this space over here, which is 20 kilometers away in a different demographic where there's a different multicultural element and a different, like everything about that community is different. And so the type of education we might want to deliver over there will be different to our original brand and our original community. Have you got any thoughts on how you might, how you think about that and whether you're okay and the board's okay with, we could be two very different communities because, or types of education because of the communities those schools will sit in?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think there's a simple answer, but I think from where I sit, it's the new campus for us, it'll still be a Westbourne Grammar School campus. It'll still deliver a Westbourne Grammar School education. It'll have the same vision, mission, values, philosophical underpinnings, vision for teaching and learning, very similar, if not identical subject offerings. They'll be engaged in the same sports program, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'm not as concerned about that as perhaps some others have been in the past. And I've heard that in my circles as well, Luke. It's, how do you, those multi-campus schools, how do you establish the same culture at each campus and all those sorts of things? But I think with the right mechanisms, the right systems, structures and processes in place, it's never going to be identical. But I think you can definitely have alignment across those campuses. And I guess the other point for this too is the location, the physical location. So you're 100% right. Different location, potentially different demographic, potentially different expectations. So really that comes back to about that brand positioning, about that education. Here are as a new entrant, let's say, into this market on this new campus, in this new location, here's our unique selling proposition. Here's what we're going to offer. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. This is what we will do. This is what we won't do. And I guess just being really deliberate in that piece around making sure that any families that are enrolling their children at the school, they have a very clear understanding of what the school stands for and what it will do for them and what it won't do for them. And I think that's as equally as important.
So, Adrian, looking towards the future, we often ask lots of personal reflection questions, and this one is for you as you build out the next part of the journey at Westbourne. We fast forward to 2030. What are your hopes and aspirations for Westbourne?
I think our strategic priorities are people, place and programs, and people come first in that. So I think my aspirations are that as we grow, we bring people along on that journey, that our growth is sustainable, that we continue to know and value each individual, that the staff are happy, that they're thriving. It's an engaged workforce, People are advocates for our school, and they continue to do some great work, supported by an investment in people, and I think that would be my vision. Of course, acknowledging that in a big school with 2,000 plus students, 400 staff, you're never going to keep people happy all the time. But I think if we adopt a people-first approach, a people-centric approach, and we continue to use that to frame everything that we do, I hope, my dream is that the school continues to go from strength to strength, and it becomes a place where people want to be. And if they are here, they know that not only are they going to be given opportunities, but they're going to be put on a career trajectory that means that hopefully they'll realise their dreams and hopes at our school. But if they leave our school into a promotional position elsewhere, that they'll understand that me and the executive team will be their biggest cheerleaders.
All right. Well, just the last final question then before we get to my favourite segment, the 6 in 60 seconds. Zooming out a little further then with the crystal ball, the future of schools in a 10 or 20 year horizon. What changes do you think we might see?
I really don't know. I really don't know. I wonder about the capacity to change the traditional notion of a school. We talk about flexibility. Flexibility is increasingly becoming an issue in schools for teachers and for professional administration staff. And so I think schools will necessarily become more flexible places. And I think that might necessitate timetable changes, the hours of the day, potentially some online or flexible modes of delivery for different stakeholders, both students and staff. But realistically, I think the world's changing at such a rapid pace. I'm constantly engaged in discussions around AI, but I don't know about its impact on schools. If we fast forward to 10 years from now, I think schools by and large will look fairly similar to what they do today. There'll still be the need for a physical space. We'll still be enrolling students. Independent schools will still be charging tuition fees. The question then becomes, what are the risks? What could happen to disrupt the existing model, the status quo? And I think there are things like, global factors, economic recession, reduction in government funding. Independent schools in Victoria have to now pay payroll tax for the first time, which is a significant bill each year, which they were exempt from in the past. So really, the future's uncertain. But by and large, if I had a crystal ball and made a prediction, I think in 10 years' time, schools will be pretty much as they are now. But there'll be a few sort of innovations and changes in terms of flexibility and modes of delivery.
I like it. All right. With that, 6 in 60 seconds, one word or idea. I do give you a score at the end, Adrian, so we'll see how well you can stick to the rules. And there's a mixed bag, let me tell you. Some people have scored 10 out of 10 and some people have scored 1 out of 10. All right. One educational narrative that's been underrated or overrated in the past decade.
Science of learning.
Underrated or overrated?
Overrated, I think.
One underrated role in a school.
I think Director of Teaching and Learning is one of the most difficult roles in a school.
The most interesting professional learning you've ever done?
I was a second-year graduate teacher and I did a 12-month online course in Teams with schools globally around the world, and it predated what we would now call MOOCs or massive open online courses. And it was a really formative experience at a time when communities of practice online and globally were really expanding. And I take that with me now and probably forever.
If you could change one rule or one thing in education, what would it be?
Standardized tests.
One book worth reading?
A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
And one person we should interview on the podcast?
I think you should interview the Associate Principal here at Westbourne, Tegan Collins, an incredible young female leader who's on the rise and will be a principal in her own right in the next few years. An incredible educator, someone who will be an incredible role model for women in years to come.
I did meet Tegan at the recent AHESA conference in Sydney, and I thought she was a gun. So we will look to have her on the show for sure. That brings it into our show for today. I hope you've enjoyed our chat with Adrian. Now, Adrian, I'm going to give you a score before I move on of 8.5 out of 10. You did pretty well at keeping it to one word or idea, but there was one answer there that you went on a little bit. So that's okay. Matt, closing comments. I know you've got them.
All right, we'll be super sharp. I like that idea of being confident in not knowing, confident in flexibility, adaptability. Every decision you make is going to be different, but just be confident in that. Do what's needed to take the board on a journey. Often we think what we need, but actually just be super clear about what they need. I love the discussion we had around in and out of the business, but being super clear about the roles, the expectations, so everyone is aware of what those are. And I guess the last one for me is just be super deliberate about telling your story. And you could do that in multiple ways. Today, we talked a lot about social media, but if you're not telling the story, someone's going to be doing it for you. And a great challenge for all principals and leaders in schools. Luke, let's go.
I did love the working in the business and on the business. And I think it's difficult to get that blend right in independent schools sometimes. And who's responsible for the on the business. I think sometimes it can just be the principal or it's one person's role, and then you've got a team of service providers, which sometimes helps with that. But I think that's a really interesting analysis of who's working in the business and the operations in the day-to-day, who's focused on the future of where it's going, not just the vision, but the mechanisms which sit underneath making the vision a reality. I loved your little, I get the sense that you're a 3-word framework person. You had the humble, hungry, and smart framework, which I quite liked in terms of thinking about hiring strategy. And then you had the last one there, which was your 3 Ps, your people, place, and programs. And I quite like that as well. I liked your notion of 360-degree visibility, and that lends itself to what Matt was saying as well, but understanding what visibility you want to have to which stakeholders, when, why, and how you're going to do that. I think there's a strategy to have in that, and I don't know that everyone thinks about that strategy of why and how you're going to do that and for what purpose. I liked your little sentence, the quote, best job in the world with the worst days. I think, from what I see in principals and in talking to principals, absolutely think that's true. One of the best jobs in the world, but absolutely has some pretty bad days and horrendous days in there amongst it as well. I took so many notes there, and for me, it's no wonder that you're having people, wanting to join your community, and it's an exciting time, I think, for Westbourne Grammar. So, Adrian, thank you for giving up your time to be on the podcast. For the audience out there, if they do want to connect with you, where's the best place that they can do that? And also, any closing comments from yourself?
I've just really enjoyed the conversation, Luke and Matt. You've had some extraordinary guests, extraordinary leaders on the podcast. So I just feel really humbled to be given the opportunity to share a few words with you today. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place, given that we've sort of talked about LinkedIn today. And no closing words except for just to echo those closing comments around. I think if you're aspiring to principalship and you're not comfortable at the moment in learning by doing, my recommendation would be just to put yourself out there, to put yourself outside of your comfort zone, to try new things. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work, because you'll be in for a shock when you do become a principal if you're not willing to just take things on board as they happen and to be responsive to situations as they arise. And I think that is absolutely key. And I think there's a phrase in Latin called limen, or it's a liminality. It's being comfortable in that space in between. And I think as principals, we are always in a liminal space between knowing and doing, or between knowing and not knowing, between making the decision and not making a decision. And I think that's just vital to contemporary leadership in schools. But, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
No, have loved the conversation, and it's always a great conversation when we don't follow the questions too much. So I found it super interesting. Remember, for the audience out there, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show, and don't forget to share the love and tell a few of your colleagues that you've listened to this awesome podcast today with Adrian Camm, and how your school can level up your leadership game for sure. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you're not signed up for the Ed Leaders newsletter, you can do that at edleaders.com.au. Thanks again to the sponsors of today's show. Would be very grateful if you could check them out. Head over to their websites as they help us make this professional learning free for you. You can connect with Ed Leaders, both Matt and I, on LinkedIn. You can kind of keep up to date with all that we're up to. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch you next week.
Go well.